On a blog post or an article on the internet or something, or an old-fashioned newspaper, if you had to write that sort of headline or heading for each of the scenes in this chapter, I want you to think about what you'd go with as a headline. So rather than Saul trying to do all of it, this little section here of just 5 select people, I'm going to give you verses 1 to 5. So scene number 1 in Mark 5. And then this section here with a few more, scene number 2, which I think is verses 6 to about 13, and then the balcony 14 to 17. You can have a ponder on your own, you can have a chat to the person next door, you could huddle as a big group, you can have a conference on the balcony to discuss it. We're looking for the headline that sums up the section that you've got. What's the main thrust, what's the main action, what's the headline sort of grabbing words you would go with. So we'll read it through, or I'll read it to you, but have a look down, Mark chapter 5, and we're into this sort of second section of 4. We said last week that Mark puts 4 sort of incredible acts of Jesus' power together. The stilling of the storm last week, the dealing with this demon-possessed man this week, and then sickness and death as the big 4 in this chunk. So let me read scene 1 for those that are right in front of me here. They went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot, but he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. So that's scene 1, Jesus arriving and being met by this man. Then for the people on this side of the room, downstairs, scene 2, verse 6. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this man, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send them out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake and were drowned. That's scene 2. And then on the balcony, scene 3, those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. So scene 3. So take a couple of minutes. Chat if you'd like to those nearby. If you could scribble down 1 or 2 headlines, that would be good, because it'd be good to hear them in a second. Right, it'd be great if you've got something to sort of share or shout out, that would be nice. Anyone? I know you've got the smallest group in the room here, but any thoughts on a headline for this first scene, first few verses?
Desperate, unhappy and self-harming.
Okay, desperate, unhappy and self-harming. Yep. Thank you. For the first scene, spirits meet their maker. I thought you were moving into the next scene. That'd be quite good. They might pinch that. Yeah. Anything else? Anything from the back? They've captured it all. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. I mean, it's the first scene is devastating. I was really bad at this, I've got to say. I've gone for the devastating effects of uncontrollable evil.
That was your headline?
That was mine, but as I say, well, you wait till you hear the second one. Dear me. It's a devastating sort of opening, isn't it? Jesus arriving by boat, and I don't know whether to move that or whether you can. And verse 2, being met by this man. It's amazing how often the word sort of impure or unclean comes up, certainly in this first section, but it crops up again later on. The spirit is described as an impure or unclean spirit. The region, Jesus is now moving out of sort of Jewish territory, so he's into Gentile territory, and again, sometimes the Gentiles are thought of as being unclean. The man comes from the tombs, the place of the dead, again, in terms of our Old Testament background, seen as unclean. He lives among the tombs. The impact, the effects of this spirit are many, aren't they? Nobody can bind him. It's interesting, isn't it? Think about the community, that whatever was going on with this man, there was obviously that drive to have to restrain him in some ways. Talks about him being chained in the past, having the strength to break the chains. They're unable now to restrain him. He was no doubt notorious in this area. It was probably an unsafe area, I guess an avoided area. And then devastating, isn't it, verse 5? Night and day he could be heard crying out and cutting himself with stones. It's a devastating picture, an awful, awful image. And there are going to be many echoes with the previous incident with the storm. The storm was out of control. This man is out of control and uncontrollable. Overpowered others, and yet clearly appeared to be overpowered himself. It's incredibly sad, incredibly heartbreaking as a situation, and seems pretty hopeless. And this is what evil does, isn't it? I think we've got to say in this incident this morning in Mark 5, we're clearly dealing with something that in a sense is a subset of the category of evil. Evil is all over the place. We see its effects. We actually, I think, probably are all very aware of it within ourselves in a sense. It's sort of being the opposite of good, anything that's not of God, and there's such a kind of breadth to its expression. It's sort of, I was thinking about the sort of E. coli outbreak and the way sort of you get some sort of infection into the water system that sort of just goes out and begins to affect and impact people. It's sort of evil is like that. You see it seeping out in different ways. We see it in our own lives, our own reactions to people, our own thoughts, our behaviours at times. And it's a common thing, isn't it? Every human being has this experience of it. But there is this thing that we saw earlier in Mark that we're seeing again here, which is described as an actual possession of this impure, unclean spirit that actually possesses an individual and overpowers the individual and is uncontrollable by others. We see him incapable of stopping it. He is a prisoner and they can do nothing about it. So there is that sense of the devastation of this situation, but also the power of evil in these first 5 verses. Nobody can control it. He can't do anything about it. The community can't do anything about it. And then we roll on into scene 2. So, this group over here, what sort of headlines did you come?
I came up with it, but I'm just going to let Susan say it. No, it's not true. Susan came up with it.
We together go, Legion of, Jesus, Legion of Demons, no match for Jesus.
Oh, nice. Legion of Demons, no match for Jesus. Any others over there?
Jesus' big dive keeps man alive.
Oh, say it.
Jesus' big dive keeps man alive.
Ooh, Jesus' pig dive keeps man alive.
Keeps man alive. Oh!
That's very good.
That is genius, that.
Very good. Any others from the back couple of rows?
We had here, Legion marches on it, and Jesus controls the pig market.
Right, say that again. Legion.
Marches on empty stomachs, and Jesus controls the pig market.
Okay, I don't know if you could hear that. Yeah, something about empty stomachs and pig markets and things. Well, here's my little pithy headline. Uncontrollable evil identifies Jesus, pleads with Jesus, obeys Jesus, and is destroyed by Jesus. So that's terrible. I then went for evil prostrates itself before God's king, but I like yours. I think you're going to get more clicks and more readers with yours.
I do think Dave's even beats ours.
Wow,
Susan's got a big critical
that's
brain.
very gracious.
Yeah.
We meet the man in this second scene on his knees, comes straight down to Jesus, falls on his knees. Interesting the words, "What do you want with me?" Verse 7, and immediately identifies Jesus. And we see this again and again in Mark's Gospel. He identifies him as Jesus, Son of the Most High God. And it's one of the interesting things in Mark, the first 8 chapters, although there's lots going on, much of it is driven on the question of Jesus' identity. Who is he? We had that at the end of the storm, didn't we? Verse 41. Who is this? Even the wind and the waves obey him. And the question of who Jesus is there chapter after chapter until halfway through chapter 8, when the disciples, with Peter speaking, they finally come to the conclusion, you are the Christ. You are the Son of God. You're the King descended from David that we've been promised and we're waiting for. But it takes them 8 chapters to get there. And yet, if you do have a Bible, if you just flick back to chapter 1 and verse 24, I think it's the first example of somebody possessed by an impure spirit. And the spirit cries out, verse 24, "What do you want with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Be quiet, Jesus says. And then just a few verses on, again, chapter 1, verse 34. Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let the demons speak because they knew who he was. And then chapter 3, verse 11. Whenever the impure spirits saw him, they fell down before him and cried out, "You are the Son of God." But he gave them strict orders not to tell anybody about him. So Jesus often quietens people when he does amazing miracles. He tells them often in the first few chapters not to tell anybody. His identity is being slowly revealed. The evil spirits know exactly who he is, but he silences them. And we get that exactly here in Mark 5, the identity of Jesus, the Son of the Most High God. And then the request, verse 7, "Don't torture me." And I've just read in chapter 1, verse 24, "Have you come to destroy us?" So it's very interesting. It's a bit of an odd angle. But in terms of these opening chapters, we see that the evil spirits, they know who he is. They know that he has power over them. And in a sense, they're expecting their own destruction. "Have you come to destroy us? Don't torture us." It's quite sort of interesting just to get their view. Sort of unusual characters, really, in Mark's Gospel. Jesus, again, interestingly, verse 9, "What is your name?" It's funny, isn't it? So you almost wouldn't think that would be something you would ask. But what is your name? And the name is Legion, for we are many. And again, in the use of the word in terms of soldiers, a legion, the commentary says 6,000 soldiers. I don't know whether that equates, but the name is Legion. And that shows us, doesn't it, that this spirit, and again, many of us are completely out of our depths of understanding this kind of thing, but is clearly a personal being with a name that Jesus can speak to and converse with. He then begs Jesus repeatedly not to send them out of the area. Again, I remember when I did some preaching training years and years ago, we were encouraged to have a question mark column. And this is where I begin to put questions in there. It's interesting, isn't it? Why did they want to stay in the area? How does it work? Is it something to do with the tombs? Is it to do with the place of the dead? Is it to do with some sort of consulting of the dead and whatever that may have been going on? We're not told the answer to those questions. But they don't want to be removed from the area. The pigs on the hillside are the demon's idea in verse 12. And it's very interesting. Will you allow us to go into them? That sort of authority that, again, some of the headlines spoke about, that's sort of been flipped on its head here. Begging Jesus, asking for permission, Jesus granting permission. Again, the pigs, in terms of Old Testament, being another unclean animal. So it's another stacking up, not only of evil in this chapter, but of its link with things being unclean. And the end point, of course, is that the 2,000 pigs go down the side of the bank and into the lake. That they die, they're destroyed. Again, I don't know what that means for these spirits. They're not mentioned in terms of what happens with them then. But what we have here, I think, in this second scene is a complete reversal of the first scene. It's almost turned upside down. I was thinking, just triggered by the message that went out, I think, from Sam yesterday about the cricket, and they're trying to find some extra cricketers for a game yesterday. And good time, from what I hear, Sam, yesterday. Yeah, good. But it sort of just reminded me of, when you're younger, and I think this applies to other things as well. But you can think you're fairly good at a sport, when you're playing at a certain level, and then you might get picked for the next level up, and the standard ramps up a little bit, but you're still perhaps feeling okay. And it's interesting, you can feel you're sort of quite good, and then you go up to the next level, and you think, and suddenly your sort of abilities are seen now in a different context, and suddenly you begin to sort of feel out of your league. I think that can happen with education and other things, other situations as well. But there's that sort of reversal of being a big fish in a small pond, and then suddenly as you go up, the thing turns around. And that's, I think, the sense I get as you move from scene 1 to scene 2. You see this devastation brought about by this all-powerful, uncontrollable spirit that's messed this man's life up in horrific ways, had an impact on all of them around him. Nobody can control it, nobody can touch it, nobody has the power to do anything about it. Then you move into scene 2, total reversal. This all-powerful, devastating thing, on its knees, as it were, identifying the man stood in front of him as the Son of the Most High God, begging and pleading not to be tortured, not to be destroyed, not to be... It's a complete reversal in scene 2. So let's go on to scene 3. And I think was this just one big conference on the balcony? The huddle, like the England team tonight, huddling together before the game. Did you have one headline, or have you got more than one for scene 3?
People of Decapolis say, better the demons we know.
Wow, very clever. You're good to tempt that word as well. People of the Decapolis saying, better the demons we know, better the devil we know. It is astonishing, this third scene, is it, from verse 14. Again, just have a look down if you've forgotten about it. But those tending the pigs run off in verse 14. They report to the town and the countryside, to the people, what has happened. Again, it's so lifelike, isn't it? I mean, it's exactly the same would happen in the village if some sort of news began to be shared, and the people just come out. They come to Jesus, verse 15. They see the man who'd been possessed by the legion of demons sitting there, dressed and in his right mind. And again, all of these stories, you sort of put yourselves in the shoes. You know this person. You've known maybe the attempts to restrain and deal with it in the past, or you've heard him night and day crying out. And to come into that scene and to see this man sitting, dressed, in his right mind, it's astonishing, isn't it? We asked this with the storm. What do you think your response would be, your reaction? And again, why not? We're not in a final very often, but when the goal went in the semi-final, the celebrations, the cheers, is that what you would expect? Thankfulness for this man, relief for him, for the community, shock, no doubt, to see him sat there and in his right mind. I mean, they'd never known him anything other than what he was. And yet it's so interesting, isn't it? And maybe this is harder for us to compute, that they see him dressed in his right mind, verse 15, and they were afraid. funny, isn't it? It's really hard, I think, maybe to sort of get a bit of a feel for that. But seeing him then dressed and in his right mind caused fear among them. And it's an amazing echo, isn't it, of the storm. Just look back again to verse 40 from last week, the stilling of the storm. In verse 40, Jesus says to the disciples, once it's gone quiet and calm, "Why are you so afraid? Do you still have no faith?" Now, last week, it's interesting, I thought in verse 40, Jesus was sort of almost looking back to when the storm was raging and is saying to them, "Why were you so afraid? Why do you still not have any faith? Why were you?" But he doesn't, does he? It's after the storm has been stilled, he says, "Why are you so afraid?" And then verse 41, Mark tells us they were terrified and asked each other, "Who is this?" I think it's so interesting, and I don't know, maybe it's just me, but it's so hard to get our minds around that when the storm is stilled, they are terrified because they're looking at the one in the boat thinking, "Well, who on earth is this?" And it seems here in Gentile territory that as the villagers come out and see the man sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they are afraid. It's almost as if the evil and the impact of evil had become the norm in a sense. They didn't like it, but it was familiar. But now they're left again, I think, although it's not written here, with the same question: who is this that can do such a thing? And verses 16 and 17, as again the headline brilliantly said, "Better the devil you know," they plead for Jesus to leave. It seems so odd. You would think perhaps, well, what more could Jesus do? What other needs are there? How could he help? And we are told that they were told all about it in verse 16 and told about the pigs as well. And people surmise that perhaps the sort of loss of livelihood, that maybe that was part of the decision as well to want Jesus to leave them. It's sort of, for me, maybe it just seems such a strange response. But that was the response: fear and flight. That was my poor headline. Supernatural power elicits fear and flight, wanting Jesus to go. Now let's just look at the end of this incident. We didn't get anyone to look at this, but have a look at verse 18. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. And Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in the Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. It's amazing if you just put verses 2 and 18 together. Scene 1, when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tombs to meet him. And verse 18, as Jesus is then getting into the boat, the man who had been demon-possessed begged to go with him. It's a complete turnaround, isn't it? Once wild, uncontrollable, crying out, cutting himself, but now begging to go with Jesus. The impulse to do evil caused by that spirit is replaced by an impulse to want to be with Jesus and to follow Jesus. Jesus' plan for the man is different. Go home, go to your own people, again, Gentile territory, and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. Go and tell them. Go and tell your story. Go and tell them what the Lord has done. And I think, in a sense, the gospel now, thinking about the sower and the seed, is beginning to go into a new non-Jewish territory. Jesus goes back in this region in chapter 7 of Mark, and the people begin to bring out their sick to Jesus. So again, lovely, isn't it? Just to imagine, who did he tell? Who did they then tell? Who did they tell? And that when Jesus came again, they were going to come and meet him. Amazing, isn't it? And it's such a fantastic way for this story to end. Something, in a sense, we can all do, isn't it? That, verse 19. Go to your own people, tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he's had mercy on you. So I want to just sort of wrap up with a few just headlines really to finish. Evil knows who he is. comes across very clearly throughout Mark. They know. They're in no doubt. Evil begs and pleads on their knees, as it were, in his presence. Thirdly, this is Genesis 3:15, isn't it? They were beginning to see that outplay of the fact that God is going to overturn, we've looked at all this earlier in Mark, overturn the fall, overturn Genesis 3, overturn evil, overturn all the effects of evil through the one that would crush the head of the serpent, crush the Satan under his feet. And it's funny, isn't it? As if you were in any doubt about that, when we see the impact of evil, the power of evil, this story in Mark 5 is so helpful, so sort of out of control, so ruling the roost. And then when the presence of the Son of the Most High is there, flat on its face, prostrating itself before him, begging. Now, this isn't, sorry about this, I hadn't planned to say this, but for those of you that are a bit older, remember the wrestling. Remember Big Daddy and Giant Haystacks? They looked so evenly matched, so equally out of shape and blubber. Two heavyweights in the corner. And it's funny how we can think that way, and we're not denying clearly the power and the influence of Satan, the evil one, and his legions. But don't miss the fact that when Jesus, and I thought about this when we were singing some of the songs, when Jesus walks into the room, they fall on their face. So evil knows who he is. Evil begs and pleads in his presence. He is the one who will crush and defeat the Satan and restore Eden. And so fourthly here we see a foretaste of his kingdom. We said that last week. I try not to repeat the same things 4 weeks in a row. But nature in his kingdom under control, restored. Evil in his kingdom defeated and removed. And it's funny, I think I said to Jacques during the week, when you see the pigs running down the hillside and into the lake, my mind went immediately, I think it's to Revelation chapter 20, verse 10, where the devil essentially goes into the lake of burning sulfur. Now, apocalyptic language, amazing images and pictures, but the devil, I think it said the Antichrist, the false prophet, into the lake of burning sulfur where they're tormented day and night. It's a foretaste of what's coming at the end. Fifthly, God has the power to transfer us from the dominion of darkness into the kingdom of the Son he loves. And again, we get something of that, don't we, in this incident, this man very clearly, graphically, under the dominion of darkness. Every human being is. That's where we start. We don't naturally love God and follow God. We're under the god of this age, the kingdom of the air, dominion of darkness. But Jesus, according to Paul in Colossians, has the power, God has the power to transfer us from the dominion of darkness into the kingdom of the Son he loves. And we sort of see that, don't you, with this man at the end. Let me come with you. Let me come to the boat with you. Let me follow you. Let me become one of your disciples in the kingdom of the Son. And that's happened to every one of us. It may not be the same sort of detail and so on as this man, but this is the work that Jesus has done in our lives, taken us from one dominion into the kingdom of which he is head. Colossians, before it says that, talks about giving thanks, living a life worthy of the Lord, patiently enduring, joyfully giving thanks that he's delivered us and changed us. So that's one of my impulses going into this week from this story, that we should live as those, in a sense, begging to follow Jesus into the boat. Take me where you're going. Show me where you're going. Equip me, empower me to live for you. Penultimately, that means it's nearly coffee time. We need to be aware, and again, you could take a whole series on this, that we as Christians are living in the overlap of the ages, they call it. Jesus' kingdom has come. It's coming here in Mark, as we've seen. Jesus' kingdom is coming there. It's being inaugurated. It's set up through the cross and resurrection. Evil and sin, everything's defeated. But there is a final day when the kingdom will come in all its fullness, when evil will be done away with and nature will be perfectly restored and sickness will be no more and death will never happen ever again. The kingdom has been inaugurated. The kingdom is coming. It's going to be consummated. You've got the beginning and the sort of full beginning at the end there. And we live between those points. If we're Christians, we now belong to the kingdom of the Son, but we live in a fallen world where evil is still present. So we live in the overlap of the ages. And that's why every day is a battle for us as Christians. The world is not geared up at the minute to worship God. We have God's Spirit living in us, but we have our sinful nature still pulling us in the wrong direction. We still have an enemy, according to the Bible, this Satan who prowls around like a lion, whispering his lies, looking to devour, looking to lead astray. So we're living in the overlap of the ages. And so we need God's help to live with Jesus as Lord, to follow Jesus, to fight evil, to fight sin. And it is a battle. We have hope and we have struggles. But again, Mark 5 shows us, doesn't it, that there is no hopeless situation. There is a power greater than temptation. There is a power greater than the evil one. And so we put our hope in him and follow him. And finally, to echo Jesus' words from Mark 1, the kingdom is near. So he urged people, repent and believe the good news. The final judgment is coming. Satan and his armies will be dealt with in that lake of burning sulphur. His judgment will come upon them. All evil will come to an end. All wrongs will be judged. And on that day, and this is my final thought for every one of us here this morning, on that day there will be no mercy. That's the end. That's when evil and everything that is opposed to God will be done away with. The day of mercy is now. Now the window of mercy is open, but it will shut then. So please, if you've never put your trust in Jesus and turned to him, think very seriously about this. This incident in Mark 5 brings it to the fore, doesn't it? That he has all power over evil and he will ultimately destroy all that is evil and all that is not of God. And so we need to get in the boat. We need to follow that man, put our trust in Jesus and know his mercy now.